Today, our guest is Dr. Abramoff, who, along with his colleagues, recently published a very comprehensive paper on scaling the adoption of medical AI in the New England Journal of Medicine. Dr. Abramoff is a professor of ophthalmology and visual sciences at the University of Iowa, and he has joint appointments in the College of Engineering. He's a retina specialist, computer scientist, and entrepreneur. He's also the founder and executive chairman of Digital Diagnostics, a leading company in autonomous AI diagnostics that has achieved FDA clearance for a device used to diagnose diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema directly in primary care settings. He has over 300 peer-reviewed publications with more than 35,000 citations, and he holds 17 issued patents. So without further ado, let's jump in. Making a difference in healthcare requires collaboration between researchers, startup founders, and policymakers. This is what Delta is about, hosting conversations with leaders on the path to serious innovation. Hello everyone, my name is Rupen, and I'm a physician on a journey to meet people who are making a delta in healthcare. All right, thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Abramoff.
Thanks so much for having me. Very exciting.
I read your recent paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I loved it. I really wanted to have you here today, and it's an honor, given that everything you've achieved. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and very exciting. And you know that most recent paper is actually based on a lot of original research, which actually to me is more interesting. But it gives a really good overview about scaling AI. Do we want AI? Why we are where we are essentially. And to be honest, I had to explain when I was writing it and reflecting with different colleagues. There's a lot that even physicians like us typically don't exactly know about fee-for-service and value-based care, and what it really means fundamentally.
Yeah, exactly.
So happy to go into. So there's sort of how does reimbursement actually work?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Sure, but then I would also I love to talk about AI and why we are in my view, where we are with AI. So, if we can do both like we were doing before we started.
Sure. Yeah. So can you start let's talk about the reimbursement model. Like if you're gonna summarize the reimbursement model by a couple of lines, what is fee for service? What is value-based care?
So fee for service and value-based care differ in essentially who determines the value of the care given. So let's say that you're a physician, I'm a physician, most listeners are physicians or providers, that you see a patient and you say, together you decide, well, there's this tumor and we need to treat it and let's go. So both the patient in some way and the provider agree that there is value to what they decide. Value-based care is where other parties also weigh in. They say, well, you may say that, doctor, that you think there's a value and you convinced your patient of the value, but actually research shows and expert opinion shows and consensus is that actually another treatment is better, or maybe no treatment is better. You see that in antibiotics for ear infection, as a famous example, where we always prescribe probably based on data. And so it's sort of a discussion about who should decide what is the value of the care. Is it the doctor, is the patient? Is it the doctor and the patient combined? Is the doctor and the patient and typically who pays for the care in many cases? Is it maybe ethicists or clinical experts? You have things like USPSTF and PCORI, CMS, the RUC, all sorts of stakeholders that weigh in on the value of the care for a specific patient. And so that is really the difference. And then fee for service is typically the older one, where it was based on this traditional doctor-patient relationship, and where once, let's say, the Medicare and payers started paying for most of the care, they said, well, we have research showing that maybe what you think has value doesn't have value, or not in this specific case. And so now you have many more parties participating, and that's what we currently call value-based care. So it's all value-based, is just determined differently who defines the value, which is more a stakeholder approach in the value-based care, and the fee-for-service really, physician. But even that, there's still, CMS is still weighing in an indirect way, and other payers are weighing in indirectly. So it's a little bit complicated, but hopefully that it's a little bit more clear.
When it comes to adopting AI in healthcare, um, what do you think are the challenges right now that prevents using AI in day-to-day in the hospital or in the clinic by physicians, by nurses?
I think just given that there is very strong, the strongest evidence of even randomized clinical trials, controlled trials now, I think it's just getting used to it. I think reimbursement and the sustainability of reimbursement plays a very big role. The data shows that, and hence that paper or that review paper that I wrote, where we so often see that, well, in the case I'm very familiar with, which is autonomous AI for the diabetic eye exam, which was a big thing when it happened in 2018, when the first time ever FDA approved something like this, where there's no human involved in the medical decision. No doctor, no human. It's only the computer. And people were familiar with AI. Physicians were familiar, and especially in radiology, but I use it in my retina specialist practice also. I use AI daily, but it's very assistive. It's still me as a provider, as a doctor, as a specialist, ultimately making the decision and being responsible for that. I just use it as extra inputs. And this was different. This is where there's no human input. And that before people had said, well, AI, yeah, but there's still a doctor in charge, right? And now there's no doctor in charge, does this actually benefit me as a patient? Will it lose to job loss for us physicians or other classes of providers? Is there racial or ethnic bias? Are we actually making things worse rather than better? Who's going to pay for this? What's happening to the data? All these concerns that are always there in a light way were really almost provoked by what happened here in 2018. That's the big thing, liability, right? Who is liable when the AI starts making errors, which it will. It's not perfect, just like a human doctor is not perfect. And so we needed answers. And I think what differed here is that what you see, and gene therapy was my biggest example, where in the 90s we're pretty far with gene therapy. Looking back, maybe not as far as we should be, but we thought we were far. And then some trials were done somewhat unethically, and young people died in the trials. And that led to essentially a reaction where funding dried up immediately, institutes closed, and it was shut down for decades. The first ever FDA approval for gene therapy was Luxturna in 2017, so very recent. And was also on retina, by the way. And so you can see that, maybe I won't call it an overreaction, but a strong reaction led to maybe a delay in getting these benefits to patients. If there's a benefit, and you need to prove that, in my view, but there was a benefit in this Luxturna case. And so you see this similarly with social media for young people, where, we created this technology and it was being used by kids. And now we started to think, well, maybe there's some harm. Whether true or not, there's some evidence to suggest there is. And the point is, now we're thinking about it in a reactive way, right? It's always reactive. With Theranos, reactive. Can we do this proactively? Can we prevent these strong reactions by just doing it right from the start? And my thought was, well, these concerns are not new. They're very basic to humanity across cultures, across countries, over centuries and even millennia. You can see bioethics being pretty stable. Is this of benefit to me as a patient? Is it of benefit to the group? Is there no, weird imbalances between group called justice or equity? Can I still make my own decisions? Autonomy. These are three crucial bioethical principles that you see across cultures. Some and individuals. I mean, we're all a little bit different. How much we value autonomy versus perfect patient outcome versus equity or justice. They are in balance, and the balance will shift slightly depending on the person, the country, the culture, time and history. And I'm not an ethical expert, but I did learn that because we published so much about it. And so what is key here is realizing that that balance exists and that you need to be able to define your way for an AI or a health system. And you can do that by measuring it. And I call that metrics for ethics. So I think a key point was, let's measure how much this AI can meet this bioethical principle. 80%. Oh, and this equity principle, 70%. And this autonomy principle, maybe 30%. Well, doesn't sound right. Our culture, our stakeholders do not accept that. We need to do more on this or that aspect. So an engineer will say, well, clear, I will just make it better on that aspect. I will pay a little bit on the other aspect, and you can find a balance. And that's what we go with. And that allowed, in my view, I'm not speaking on behalf of all the stakeholders, but essentially all stakeholders, patients, patient organizations, physicians and other provider organizations, payers, including agencies like CMS, ethicists, regulators like FDA, all come to support this, strongly support this, in fact. And that was key because, as we were just talking about, in my view, innovation in healthcare, if only one party says no, it doesn't happen. It's in that way pretty conservative, and conservative in a good sense that's trying to place essentially
Protect
safety.
patients.
Yeah, and so it's about patients, and so it's a good thing, and but therefore you need to be able to have answers for all stakeholders to all of these questions, and we did from these bioethical principles. And can you show it? You can address all these things, and so I think that really helped that we started with that, and then developed, and I continue to work with FDA and many other regulatory agencies on AI regulation based on an ethical framework, but even a reimbursement. So we created the reimbursement framework for AI based in ethics, which is kind of, whoa, I hadn't thought about that. And I hadn't, but it worked. I mean, we concluded for this diabetic eye exam, the reimbursement should be around, wasn't wide it was, and we published in the peer-reviewed literature a few years ago. And we went into CMS, and ultimately, I'm not speaking on behalf of CMS, but they did come out with a very close number because it was based on equity, and it was very transparent, and here we are, right? And so I think that proactive part is really important, that we continue to think about what we're doing, being able to measure and show how we're meeting these bioethical principles, and from there, make sure that stakeholders continue to support it. So you don't get this reaction, this strong reaction that we have seen in other fields.
Gotcha.
So now back to your question. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so you touched base on the reimbursement part. So for people who are creating AI systems or large language models in the healthcare, what type of AI, in your opinion, what type of AI technology would insurance or Medicare or Medicaid would be interested in paying for?
So, and now I realize what your previous question was, and we'll get right into what you're asking now. But you can see from a very important paper in New England Journal of Medicine a few months ago, November, where they measured AI adoption and scaling based on claims data. And you can see in our case, the fastest growing AI in the world, by the way, that there's an inflection point when national reimbursement was created by CMS. So you had FDA authorization, MIPS HEDIS clearance, many other things were addressed, but the really takeoff happened, the immediate growth stage happened when there was national reimbursement, hence the importance of reimbursement. And then what I would say, when you think about this ethical framework, very important is patient benefit, right? So if you work your way back from what is the best process for a patient, for the best outcome, and work your way backward from there to, well, what role, if any, can the AI I'm envisioning play in that? That's a better way than saying, oh, there's this, I call it glamour AI. There's this really cool AI I built. Let's find a problem. Let's find a disease to solve.
Gotcha.
Right now, you're trying
so think
to
about the outcome before thinking about the
yes,
solution.
you work your way back from the outcome rather than, and it's interesting, right? I'm from Iowa, which is between the coasts.
Yeah.
You fly over country, right? And so on the West
Yeah.
Coast, I see a lot where we have this really cool model, and let's find a disease. And so that's the tech approach, right? And
Yeah.
then on the other side, it's really, well, we doctors have always been doing this, and doctors are perfect, and we don't really trust this tech. And so the fact that we're in between probably allowed us to, see both sides and essentially say, starts with the process, what role, if any, should this technology play? Build the technology around that. That makes it so much easier to measure patient benefit. And if you have patient benefit, it's much harder not to create reimbursement. If you have better outcomes with this, it becomes hard. Still not perfect, like the pair therapeutics example that I mentioned, where maybe opinions differ a little bit, but there was randomized clinical trials for better outcomes in some aspect. There was FDA authorization, there was distribution, everything right. Reimbursement remained a challenge, and they went out of business last year. So this technology is not reaching patients. So, when your listeners are considering this, be very careful that you consider everything you're planning. But again, patient benefit and health equity, as important right now. You really need to be focused on that and see how you can address that. And the better data you have to support that, maybe ultimately indeed a clinical trial, the better your case will be. But it's not easy.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very complex. I think innovation in healthcare is like one of the hardest things. Like your customer is not your payer is not your user. It's like it's very confusing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
And then and not only that, and then everyone wants to weigh in because it's healthcare, right? And so
correct.
even more stakeholders. Literally, the list of stakeholders is like 6 or 7 long. Absolutely. And don't forget, if you are considering, building a company, you have investors also. We also have their opinions, right? Where it should go.
Correct.
Yeah.
I want to quote from your paper, and in your paper mentioned that as patient characteristics and the standard of care shift, AI system must undergo continuous updates and regulatory assessment, which in turn require funding, and that must come from somewhere. You have a huge experience in this space. Can you expand a bit on this point? Because I think it's very important to talk about the ongoing costs of any AI startup to take into consideration when they go to this market.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a one and done typically, right? So I think that's sort of what I'm explaining, but also from the payer side, that they don't think, oh, you do the R&D, you amortize the R&D, you're done. And because some proposal, and maybe it's more a response to some proposals that have been floating around, where people say, well, we will charge, the R&D is expensive, you do the clinical trial, you amortize that, and then you're done, and you can, have a very, very low reimbursement that meets cost, defined in that way. And that's just not the case. You don't see that. You see, even with diabetes, you saw Ozempic is starting to have an impact, right? Another GLP-1 inhibitors, they're starting to have an impact. So the complication landscape is changing, just as an example of how they shift. Standards of care change, but now you need to adopt the AI to have continue to have the best outcomes for patients. So we all know as providers that this is true, but AI systems must be able to keep up, and in fact, almost be in front of that, so they will be, adopted and remain standard of care. So it's sort of a message of it's never a one and done. It's not. It's almost like the arguments for continuing medical education for providers. No one says, "Oh, you're done now. 20 years ago, you graduated. We trust you now." No way.
Okay. And now talking about the payment of AI in different service systems, and you talked about this also in your paper. So can you touch base a bit on what are the issues of paying for AI system in a fee-for-service model? Let's say I'm a startup founder, I have this cool AI or an AI that improves outcome, and I go to a hospital or a clinic, they have the fee-for-service model. What do you think are the challenges I might face?
Well, you have to think back to how fee-for-service typically works. It's never always, but the typical is that, well, you need regulatory clearance, right? So let's assume that you now have FDA with some evidence, some amount of evidence that the FDA required you to have, or you wanted to have, that's hopefully. And then part of this is creating a CPT code. It starts with that in most cases. That means that the CPT editorial panel needs to weigh in on whether they, are creating a code for a new service. And there's a lot of discussion that goes into that where, are people using it? Are they going to use, providers, are they going to use it? Will patients use it? So there's a lot of decisions being made after FDA clearance before you have a CPT code. And what you see often happening is CPT editorial panel then decides there will be category 3 code, which typically is not reimbursable, but only allows health systems and other providers to claim, that CPT code. And now you can measure utilization. And then there's this debate, well, do we see enough utilization after a few years for moving this from category 3 to 1? And what is the exact designation? And then once you have a CPT-1 category code, now essentially CMS and payers need to start considering, I'm not speaking on behalf of CMS or anyone else, I'm just explaining how I've seen it work. They need to start considering what, if any, the reimbursement should be and how it should work. And so they have their own, regulatory methods for that, which are very complicated. And definitely, I'm not going to be able to explain here. And, people glaze over. And also, I may not have all the fine details, and there's experts on the CPT editorial panel who know this way better than I do. But the point is it's a slow process, and you need to convince a lot of people that it's worth doing, if you see what I mean. And it's mostly the runway to get there that is concerning if you have, if an investor, and the typically runways for SaaS, software as a service, right, which is what Uber and many of these apps that are used to in tech, 3 years, 4 years, and with no success or not, right? And we win or we lose, but that's venture capital. Here, it may take 8 years just to start, and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
again, right, and or more. And so you see in the New England Journal paper how important that reimbursement is, but then you're only starting on the inflection point. So maybe 11 years you can see some effect, maybe 12 years. We were, with the company I founded, we're a little bit faster, went way faster. But even then, there was a time needed that was longer than what most investors are used to. And I'm not speaking on behalf of investors either here. I'm just observing what I see.
Gotcha. Now, I just have a question for our physicians who are listening to this. It's very inspiring. Like, you have a huge career in AI, ophthalmology, research, tons of publications, and this company. Can you just take me through, like, if I'm a physician and I have an idea, I want to implement this, I want to create a company. What should I leave my clinical work and focus on the company, or should I build a team to help me build this company while I'm still doing a clinical work? Do you think a physician who's innovating should also have a foot in the clinical work so they know what the problems are and they tackle them, or should they focus only on one thing? Like, what's the process like for a physician to become an innovator?
Yeah, fair enough. So, me personally, I still see patients. I
Mm-hmm.
continue to see patients. I think it's important because I work a lot on policy for AI in general and
Mm-hmm.
regulation, and it's just important to have a foot in the clinic. So I continue to know what's going on. It's just I'm not an administrator by nature. I think for me it was more not that I wanted this, but it took me there. So
Mm-hmm.
I was trained as a physician. I was also trained as an engineer. I have a PhD in machine learning. Because of interest and because of wanting to help people. And I tried to combine it. It was very difficult at the time. And now everyone says, oh, yeah, computer engineering and AI and medicine. Yeah,
Yeah,
obvious.
it makes sense.
No way. At that time, and I'm old, you can see from my hair. But at that time, what you could do then was electronic health records. So the people, they were interested in both. They went into EHRs, and that's just not of interest to me. I want to impact patients more directly. And then when I was starting to be a resident, a fellow, etc., I started seeing all these access problems. Right, that for me the most important problem in healthcare around the world in the US, it's very high quality healthcare, but it is not accessible equally. And there's many reasons. In the diabetic eye exam, it's because the people need to make an appointment and they have a job and they have childcare and there's snow, or I'm in Iowa, it's 6-hour drive, right? And it's going to be normal anyway. Why go, right? And that's typical for many cases. So hardly, I notice, as physicians or providers, think about the patients we don't see. We are so focused on the patients that do come to us that we
Mm-hmm.
forget that in many cases it's 60, 70, 80% of patients who don't even get that specialty care. It's not because we don't want to see them. It's because there's all these frictions, And so for me, that was the focus. That I care greatly about those patients getting access. And I saw AI as the unique solution for that. So for me, it was, how do we get this to patients? And I thought, I literally went through this. I thought, well, we'll just publish scientific papers and studies showing that this is really good, right? And then it will automatically be adopted. Well, nothing. Zero.
I
As you
agree. I
all
agree.
know,
You can write
yeah,
as much as you want, but no one's gonna adopt it.
nothing.
Yes.
You can claim all you want. Look, here's the evidence. There's so much data. Nothing. So then you say, okay, what does it take? And you look at, maybe pharma, right? It's very interesting because I looked at a lot of pharma, and there we have a clear pipeline. You have an NIH R01 grant. You find some folding protein that makes blind mice see, and it happens for, it may work for kids. Some pharma companies and you patent it, and your university helps patent it, and some partner, some pharma entity is probably going to come in, say, well, we want to license this, we'll take it to phase 0, 1, 2, 3, and it works or doesn't work. But there is sort of a known pipeline. And until I think and maybe some other companies, that didn't exist in AI for sure. So people thought, and I was recommended, well, just patent, right? And then Google, IBM, whoever will come in and swoop it up. So I've now 25 patents, I think. I just got 2 more issued. Various aspects of AI. Nothing, right? Nothing.
Oh, wow.
And so that was my hope, right? I mean, I just, let me do my models. Not anymore, but at the time. And so I just want to get it to patients. How do I get to? Okay, I will try philanthropy. That, it's easy if you make blind children see. It's what is really key here, I realized, is when I started talking to FDA, where I said, hey, I want a computer to make a diagnosis. And they said, hey, whoa, not so fast. Let's talk, right? 2010, took 8 years. And so that's a lot of administration paperwork, thousands and thousands of pages of documents and records, etc. And that's typically not what philanthropists, maybe in Iowa, it's in a farmer, who sold their farm, blind kids making them see next year, a bunch of paperwork. Well, the decision is easy, right? So philanthropy route didn't work so well either. And then, okay, I will need to make a startup. And then, if you make a startup with a $1 million business plan, no one wants to invest. So you need to be very ambitious. So I was. And so that's where it happened, right? So then you start a company and then you start hiring people. And I was CEO for a while. And then I realized, well, there's other people better than me at hiring people who hire good people and can really build this and do the marketing and the sales. So that's why I'm, executive chairman rather than CEO. There's much better people now in many aspects, in coding, right? In so many aspects. There's always better people. And so they should do that. And so, but it took a while, right? And there's a lot of risks involved because it took us 8 years. Very patient investors go from the idea and talking for the first time to FDA to actually getting the authorization. How do you develop a clinical trial? What about bias? None of that had been addressed, right? And so that was just the start. And then it was so interesting. The day that the FDA did a big press release on the day it was authorized in April 18. And immediately I got a call from a well-known, I won't name names, the CEO of a well-known retail health clinic saying, hey, we want this. And we talked for a while and it was very exciting. And there was a question, hey, what about reimbursement? Well, autonomous AI reimbursement, well, okay. So that was the next 5 years. How you even do that? How do you pay for something like this, right? And that's, by the way, what the paper, which is the reason.
About,
yeah, it's sort of, it puts out the process what we went through to do that, because there's all these hurdles, all these stakeholders that you need to convince to support this, and we did. But it took a lot. But this is not to scare anyone off because it has now been done. You can point to what we did and say, look, we just want the same thing. So you can definitely be faster. And a lot of routes that we tried and weren't successful, just don't try them, I would say. So long story short, it's doable, which is probably the most important thing. If you know something is doable and we can get it to patients. And what I'm most proud of is now, after all this work, was it worth it? Because now you have this thing, it's with patients being used daily on tens of thousands of patients. And was it worth it? And now we have randomized clinical trials, controlled trials that show, health equity improves in the AI arm. productivity and specialist satisfaction improves in the AI arm versus the control arm. And that's just amazing that we actually have the hardest evidence there is of that this was
Oh, wow.
worth. So what I set out to do is improve patient outcomes. Yeah, it's happening, right? And so it also shows I started with what is important for patients and worked my way back. So what my model could, how to build a model around it rather than the other way around. So if you
Very
are a
inspiring.
clinician, it's very doable. Don't try this at home and look carefully, but it's doable. And I think we're starting to see now where this pipeline concept that you see in pharma is starting to be built in healthcare AI. So, it's looking much better in the future. There's a lot of policy work that needs to be done on how do we reimburse AI generally, where we, are happily paying for what improves patient outcomes or maybe drives down cost at equal or better quality. And maybe we don't want to pay for the AI that doesn't do that. And how do we separate those? And that's just a little bit of work. But I do want to say, you mentioned healthcare is, maybe slow in adopting. The first autonomous AI that was legal to use was in healthcare. You still cannot formally, in all states, buy an autonomous car, right? There's an autonomous tractor, but it's only made by John Deere, but it's only on the farmer's field. You cannot have it on the main road. So healthcare was the first.
Wow, very impressive. I didn't know that.
That cool, huh?
And it is very cool. I agree. This is very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that story. Going back to your paper, now in your paper also you talk about implementing AI in value-based care model, and you say that it could be more cost effective since it helps physicians run the game smoother. Can you explain why AI in value-based model is more cost effective in your opinion?
So just correcting slightly, I didn't say that. So I didn't mention cost effective, just to be very specific. What I meant is that there's just different ways as an AI creator, as a payer, you can think about this. And I explained the fee-for-service path, and it can be long. And what we went through with this specific type of value-based care, which is closing care gaps, which are known as MIPS and HEDIS, right? Is that process, once you have the right evidence, was
Gotcha.
straightforward. And I'm also seeing that some health systems care mostly about the fee-for-service reimbursement and only ask about that. And some say, well, we're not even billing, we just care about closing the care gap because we know how to value that. But I'm not explaining it in the paper, but fee-for-service is relatively easier, it's not to get, but to calculate, oh, when I pay for this service, I get so much in reimbursement. It's on a per patient level, it's per service. You can do the math. It's pretty simple math. If you pay more than you get, maybe you should do less. If you get more than you pay, supposedly it's cost neutral, right? That's what reimbursement is about. But typically it so varies that there is some light there. But definitely if you lose money on it, probably not do more of them. And they have a mechanism, most health systems, most providers, to do that. With things like MIPS and HEDIS, as I try to explain, it's very non-linear. It's not discontinuous, meaning for the first patient, you get nothing and nothing and nothing, and then suddenly you get a lot of reward, financial reward, at a certain number, a certain threshold, and it's depending on many of the things that the health system does. So if your orthopedic surgeon do the right number of the right type of surgeries, it will affect your payments for a diabetic eye exam, right? And so that's just one example where what I meant to say, or what I said, I know, is because I'm very careful with my words, I have to be, is that it's more the path that may be easier. And yeah, is there a difference? It's pretty hard to calculate. I didn't want to go into that. We are actually modeling this out right now. So we finally submitted a paper on the cost effectiveness with a very extensive model with a big group at Hopkins that's coming out soon. And then now I'm really excited about this other bit that we're, about to submit, not ready yet, but we're getting there.
So is it accurate to say AI is easier to get reimbursed in value-based model when compared fee for service?
I'm not saying that exactly, but there may cases where it looks like that.
It looks like that. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, we have to be
Sorry
careful.
about it.
It's I
I just
completely
have to
agree
be
with you because it's
careful. Yeah.
yes, it's very wishy-washy and different healthcare system. Like even
And
state healthcare
again,
system might have value-based care, but it's different value-based care.
so in a different state with a different part of Medicaid and Medicare
Yes.
and correction geographic correction, all of that will affect these equations. So can I say that in general? No, but we need to know. And
There are
if
many
it's
variables.
hard for a health system to calculate this, they may scare away or do not fully get it. And I think that's one of the issues I was hoping to touch on, that, if we make it easier to figure this out, then, it becomes more transparent in my view.
Yeah. And also, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that AI can be double-edged sword when it comes to reimbursement in value-based care. What do you mean by that? Like, or can you give an example of that?
Again, I'm pushing back a little bit on your wording
Yeah,
because
it's okay. I'm
not
happy
my
to.
word.
It's
No,
a
no,
very
no.
interesting discussion.
No. So I didn't say that. What I meant was, it's interesting how these value-based care can be so. If you maybe you have thought about it carefully as a provider, but my experience as a physician,
Hmm.
what I knew about MIPS Adherence before I started is just administrators telling me to see more patients because we need to meet our MIPS criteria.
Yeah,
Now,
exactly.
that is my experience. And I didn't, carefully go into what, exactly the details. And maybe you didn't either, but I think many physicians don't, because we have, to be honest, we need to take care of our patients, right? And
Exactly.
so, but if you go in the details, it's this weird thing where you can do, if the limit, for in this case, a diabetic eye exam, you need to be at 80% of a certain population with diabetes needs to have the eye exam done in a certain year, the measurement year it's called.
Hmm.
But if you meet 79.9%, so one patient less, you get nothing. And
Yeah,
so that's just hard to understand at first, to get it across. And then not only that, you still get nothing if your orthopedic surgeons and your dermatologists didn't meet their criteria, right? You all did
correct.
better. So that is then the other one is risk based, right? Where RAF, HEC, risk adjustment factor, where it's like if you have more severe diagnosis in a certain population, it's considered that you will therefore provide more services, and therefore it's a block reimbursement, right? It's per group, per population, and so you get more because your population is sicker. That's sort of the principle behind it, and I'm not the expert. There are experts in this field also, but what it means is that if you come in an AI and you start diagnosing more people, and the more people become severe, yes, absolutely, the reimbursement will go up. But then ultimately, if your AI is doing what it should do, which is make outcomes better, it will also make, people better, and therefore, ultimately reimbursement goes down. So there's these paradoxical effects that you as a doctor will say, well, yeah, but don't we all want better patient outcomes? Or there's this whole financial system that is built quite complex, as you see, because I'm not even going into all the complexities, that can have somewhat paradoxical effects. Not because anyone intended that, but just that's how it works out in practice.
So now my last question is like, do you have examples of AI being reimbursed successfully? And why do you think these tools are being reimbursed? These AI models are being reimbursed other than the other AI models?
Well, as you hear, I'm can things be improved in this healthcare system? Yes, but we achieved a lot, and so that explains my answer. Yes, heart flow for cardiac care outflow measurement from CT is reimbursed, and it's the most widely used AI that exists. So yes, successful in reimbursement. Why is that? Because they have evidence showing better outcomes. Luminate Score from Digital Diagnostics, the company I happen to found. I have a conflict of interest, obviously. We did all this work. And yes, it's being reimbursed. CPT code 92229 is created specifically for the diabetic eye exam. So it's very specific for an autonomous AI doing diabetic eye exam, very fine grade code. And yes, it's reimbursed. And again, because we were able to show better outcomes. And so I think when you ask, well, why do I think? I'm not speaking for CMS. Every stakeholder supports this, and I think that is the biggest key. What any healthcare actor doesn't want to see is people vocally disagreeing with what they're doing. That doesn't go over well. Like you said before, one says stop, it's over. So I think in general, the more you can show, if you're thinking about your AI as a budding AI creator, yeah, look at patient outcome. It is so much easier. The more evidence you have, the better. And to be honest, in ophthalmology, in retina, it's still surprising to me even today for decades. This was not me. This was not. It was the scientists who did this 50, 60 years ago. They wanted to have clinical evidence for anything we do in diabetes and in other retinal diseases, and it was still reaping the fruits of today. It's just the wisdom of these people is what allows is why it went so fast in a way. Because if you're in a field where there's very little evidence for any practice, any process, you can build an AI, but now you need to do all that legwork. Why are we even bothering, right? And in many cases in the eye, and in some other fields, you have more evidence of that. So now it's more about building the AI and improving the AI can do what we already knew, could be done.
Sweet. Great. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end. Thank you so much for all this insight. It was a very great episode, and I encourage all the listeners to read your paper. I will leave it in the comments below.
Oh,
It's
cool, yeah.
very, very insightful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course.